Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This time, we're taking you on a journey back in time to explore a period of immense change, upheaval, and ultimately tragedy. Picture this: Europe in the early 19th century, just beginning to recover from the Napoleonic Wars. Decades of conflict have left their mark, but there's a glimmer of hope in the air. Leaders from across the continent come together, not to punish, but to rebuild and forge a lasting peace. That was the vision of the Congress of Vienna in 1815, a moment that seemed to promise a new era of stability and cooperation. But how did that vision, that dream of enduring peace, ultimately unravel, leading to one of the most devastating conflicts in human history, World War I? That's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
It's a fascinating story, really. You have this incredible effort to reshape the political landscape of Europe after years of war, this attempt to create a system that would prevent such widespread conflict from happening again.
Right, they called it the Concert of Europe, this idea of a balance of power between the major players: Britain, Austria, Prussia, Russia, even France, despite Napoleon's recent escapades.
And what's remarkable is that it worked, at least for a while. The Congress of Vienna ushered in a period of relative peace, one that lasted for several decades. But as we'll see, there were inherent tensions, underlying currents that would eventually pull this carefully constructed system apart.
So, let's talk about those tensions. One figure who stands out from the Congress of Vienna is Talleyrand, representing France. He managed to secure a surprisingly good deal for his country, considering they were, well, the ones who had just been defeated.
Talleyrand was a master diplomat, a survivor who had navigated the turbulent waters of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic era. He understood the importance of balance, of ensuring that no single power became too dominant. His maneuvering at Vienna helped prevent France from being isolated and punished, paving the way for its eventual reintegration into the European system.
But even with Talleyrand's diplomatic finesse, there were cracks in the foundation of this new order. The Congress of Vienna focused primarily on the interests of the great powers, often disregarding the aspirations of smaller nations and ethnic groups.
Exactly, and that's where we see the seeds of future conflict being sown. The disregard for national self-determination, the suppression of liberal and nationalist movements. These would create resentment and instability in the long run.
And it wasn't long before those tensions began to surface. In the 1830s and 1848, a wave of revolutions swept across Europe, challenging the established order.
These revolutions were fueled by a potent mix of liberalism, nationalism, and economic grievances. They demonstrated that the forces unleashed by the French Revolution, Mender White, the ideas of popular sovereignty, individual rights, and national self-determination were still very much alive.
It's like that old saying, when France sneezes, Europe catches a cold.
What? Benedict.
That Austrian statesman knew what he was talking about.
He did. And while these revolutions were largely suppressed, they were a sign of things to come. They exposed the vulnerabilities of the Concert of Europe, revealing that the established order was not as stable as it might have seemed.
So, we have this system designed to maintain peace, but it's already facing challenges from within. And then enters a figure who would truly shake things up: Otto von Bismarck, Prussia's Iron Chancellor.
Bismarck was a pragmatist, a believer in realpolitik, which basically means conducting politics based on practical considerations, rather than on ethical or ideological concerns. He saw an opportunity to unify the German states under Prussian leadership, and wasn't afraid to use military force to achieve his goals.
And he wasn't kidding about that Iron Chancellor nickname. Bismarck orchestrated 3 wars in rapid succession: the Schleswig-Holstein War, the Austro-Prussian War, and the Franco-Prussian War.
Each of these wars was carefully calculated, a step in Bismarck's grand strategy to create a unified Germany. He understood that power, both military and economic, was the key to achieving his ambitions.
And he wasn't afraid to ruffle some feathers along the way, especially in the case of France. The Franco-Prussian War ended in a humiliating defeat for France, leaving them with a deep sense of resentment and a burning desire for revenge, or as they say in French, revanchism.
That's a key concept to keep in mind as we move forward. The Franco-Prussian War not only resulted in the unification of Germany, but also sowed the seeds for future conflict. It created a lasting rivalry between France and Germany, one that would have profound consequences for Europe in the years to come.
Okay, so Bismarck has achieved his goal. A powerful German empire has emerged. But it seems like this new power dynamic is already creating new problems. The Concert of Europe is looking pretty fragile at this point. Where do we go from here?
You're absolutely right. The emergence of a unified Germany significantly altered the balance of power in Europe. Bismarck, though, was a shrewd strategist. He understood that Germany's newfound strength could also make it a target, so he spent a great deal of effort constructing a complex network of alliances, attempting to isolate France and prevent the formation of any hostile
He
coalitions.
was playing a high-stakes game of diplomatic chess, trying to maintain peace even as the pieces on the board were shifting. But how effective was this strategy in the long run?
Well, Bismarck's system worked for a while, but it was inherently fragile, reliant on his own political skill and a certain amount of luck. And when Bismarck was dismissed by Kaiser Wilhelm II in 1890, the carefully constructed web of alliances began to unravel.
Wilhelm II seems like a bit of a wild card. What were his ambitions, and how did they differ from Bismarck's?
Wilhelm II was much more impulsive and ambitious than Bismarck. He desired a more assertive foreign policy, a place in the sun for Germany, as he put it. He wanted to expand Germany's colonial possessions, build a powerful navy, and challenge Britain's global dominance.
It sounds like Wilhelm II's vision for Germany was much more aggressive and expansionist than Bismarck's more cautious approach.
Yeah.
How did this shift in foreign policy impact the European landscape?
Well, it certainly increased tensions. As Germany flexed its muscles on the world stage, other European powers began to feel threatened. France, still smarting from its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, saw Germany's growing power as a direct threat to its own security. Russia, too, was wary of German ambitions, especially in the Balkans, a region of long-standing strategic importance.
So, we see the formation of two rigid alliance blocs. The Triple Alliance, consisting of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, and the Triple Entente, comprising France, Russia, and Great Britain. This seems like a recipe for disaster. With everyone locked into these alliances, wouldn't any conflict between two countries automatically drag everyone else in?
Precisely. That's the inherent danger of such rigid alliance systems. They create a situation where a relatively minor incident can quickly escalate into a major war. And that's exactly what happened in 1914.
Let's talk about that incident. The spark that ignited the powder keg, so to speak. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo.
It's almost unbelievable how one event, the assassination of an heir to a throne, could set in motion a chain of events that would lead to the deaths of millions. But that's exactly what happened.
Can you walk us through the immediate aftermath of the assassination? What were the key decisions that ultimately led to war?
Well, Austria-Hungary, seeing the assassination as a direct attack on its prestige and authority, decided to use the opportunity to finally deal with Serbia, which they believed was harboring anti-Austrian sentiment, and supporting nationalist groups in the Balkans. They issued a harsh ultimatum to Serbia, one that was deliberately designed to be difficult to accept.
So, they were essentially looking for a fight.
It certainly seems that way. They were confident that they had the backing of Germany, which had, in effect, given Austria-Hungary a blank check, promising to support them no matter what action they took.
And what are the other powers? How did they respond to this escalating crisis?
Russia, which saw itself as the protector of Serbia and the Slavic people in the Balkans, began to mobilize its army in support of Serbia. Germany, fearing a two-front war against France and Russia, saw this mobilization as a threat and declared war on Russia, and shortly thereafter, on France.
It's like that domino effect we talked about earlier. One country's actions trigger a reaction from another, and soon everyone is drawn into the conflict.
Exactly, and that's how, in the span of just a few weeks, Europe went from a state of uneasy peace to a full-blown war, one that would engulf the entire world.
But what about Great Britain? They weren't initially part of the conflict, were they? What ultimately brought them into the war?
Great Britain initially tried to remain neutral, but when Germany violated Belgian neutrality by invading Belgium as part of its plan to attack France, it changed the equation. Great Britain had a long-standing commitment to defend Belgian neutrality, and they also saw Germany's growing power as a threat to their own interests.
So, in a sense, it was Germany's own actions, their violation of Belgian neutrality, that brought Great Britain, the most powerful empire in the world at the time, into the war against them.
That's right. And with Great Britain's entry into the war, the stage was set for a global conflict, one that would last for 4 long years and claim the lives of millions. The fragile peace that had been established at the Congress of Vienna had completely collapsed, replaced by a horrific new reality of industrialized warfare.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That one event, the assassination of an archduke, could trigger such a catastrophic chain of events. It really makes you wonder, could things have gone differently? Was this war truly inevitable?
That's a question historians have debated for decades. There's no easy answer, of course.
Well, let's delve into that question, explore some of the what-ifs of history, and perhaps gain a deeper understanding of the forces that led to this devastating conflict. It's almost mind-boggling to think about how Europe went from this elaborate peace conference in Vienna to the trenches of World War I in just a century. Were there any points where we could have veered off that path? Any missed opportunities to avoid the disaster?
It's certainly tempting to play the what-if game with history, and there are a number of points where different choices, different circumstances, might have led to a different outcome.
Like, what if Bismarck hadn't been dismissed? He was clearly a master at navigating the complexities of European diplomacy. Could he have prevented things from spiraling out of control?
It's certainly possible Bismarck, for all his flaws, understood the importance of balance
Yeah.
and was adept at preventing any single power from becoming too dominant. His successors lacked his finesse and were perhaps more easily swayed by nationalistic sentiment and imperial ambitions.
So, Wilhelm II's more aggressive foreign policy, his desire for a place in the sun for Germany, played a significant role in escalating tensions.
Absolutely. Bismarck's approach was based on realpolitik, a pragmatic understanding of power, and the need to maintain a delicate equilibrium. Wilhelm II, on the other hand, was driven by a more idealistic, even romantic, vision of Germany's destiny, one that ultimately led to greater risk-taking and a more confrontational approach to international relations.
But wasn't it more than just personalities? We talked earlier about the rise of nationalism and the scramble for colonies. Surely these larger forces also contributed to the outbreak of war.
Of course, these underlying currents of nationalism and imperialism created a climate of intense competition and mistrust among the European powers. The pursuit of colonies, the race for resources, the desire for national prestige, all of these factors fueled tensions and made it more difficult to resolve disputes peacefully.
So, it was a complex interplay of factors, both individual decisions and larger historical forces. That ultimately led to the outbreak of World War I. It wasn't inevitable, perhaps, but the path to war was paved with a series of choices and circumstances. That made conflict increasingly likely.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most important lessons we can draw from this period of history. The decisions we make, both as individuals and as nations, have consequences, often unintended consequences. And those consequences can ripple through time, shaping the course of events for generations to come.
It's a sobering thought, and one that's certainly relevant to our own time. We live in a world that's still grappling with the legacy of World War I, a world where nationalism, competition for resources, and the threat of conflict are still very much present.
Indeed. Understanding the past, the mistakes and miscalculations that led to such a devastating conflict is crucial if we want to avoid repeating those mistakes in the future. It's not about assigning blame or dwelling on what-ifs, but rather about learning from history, recognizing the patterns, the warning signs, the potential pitfalls that can lead to disaster.
What stands out to you as the most important takeaway from this journey from Vienna to Versailles? What key insight should our listeners keep in mind as they reflect on this tumultuous period of history?
What strikes me most is the fragility of peace. The peace established at the Congress of Vienna, though flawed, represented a genuine effort to create a more stable and cooperative international order. But that peace was ultimately undermined by a complex mix of factors: nationalism, imperial ambitions, the failure of diplomacy, and perhaps most importantly, the inability to adapt to a rapidly changing world.
And those challenges, those underlying tensions, are still with us today, aren't they?
Absolutely. The world is a different place, of course, but the lessons of history remain relevant. If we want to build a more peaceful and just world, we need to be mindful of the forces that can lead to conflict. We need to prioritize diplomacy and cooperation over aggression and zero-sum thinking. And we need to be willing to adapt to change and embrace a more inclusive and equitable vision of the future.
Well said. And on that note, we wrap up our deep dive into the road from Vienna to Versailles, a journey that explored the complex interplay of personalities, ideologies, and historical forces that led to the outbreak of World War I. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of the past, and that it's given you some food for thought as we navigate the challenges of the present. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeking those deeper connections that help us understand the world around us.